about an expression that has been running through my mind a lot, and perhaps it has been yours as well, and that is, you can't see the forest for the trees. How many of you are familiar with that phrase? Yeah. What it essentially means, for those who aren't familiar with it, is that we can't see situations as they are while we're in the midst of them. And most definitely, it's been on my mind because, as Jason mentioned, I am part of a team that's responsible for looking out and looking to the future. But if you've ever been in the forest in the middle of the night, in particular, it's very difficult to see right in front of your eyes. And so it's very important for us to pop up above that canopy to get a perspective of what is going on in this ecosystem. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you a perspective that is another chapter in a long book that we are writing, and that is around hybrid, specifically from the perspective of HR talent experts. Whether they're called human resource experts, human experience experts, it was really around trying to define what is the future of hybrid. We begin every research project that we have with a central question, and the central question that we had for this work was, what is the most effective hybrid model? But what we quickly learned in talking to everybody is there is no one effective hybrid model. And actually, the question that we asked was far greater than that. And what people were really trying to define was really, what is the future of work? Fundamentally, as we began to have conversations with them, what we learned really quickly is there are two fundamental questions that they're wrestling with. The first one, which is what people do and who they do it with, will stay constant. That is not going to change. But it is where and how they are doing that work that is really what is being redefined, and that is the topic of hybrid. As Jade already pointed out, the importance of alignment is going to be critical now more than ever before. I think his presentation really summarized that. And what we're looking at here is process, people, and place coming together. This is the end of a singular decision maker. And in fact, as we begin to look, we began to talk about these things as cranks in a wheel. And if you're familiar with gears, right, one thing is turning while the other is turning. And that is going to require this future as we move forward is really going to be responsible to have an integrated solution. However, as we look at this integrated solution, what we're also seeing is that it's important to have the business factors. So as organizations are considering what it is they want to do or how they want to adopt to become a hybrid organization, there are 4 critical business factors that they're considering. Of course, can they maintain or preserve their business continuity? That makes a lot of sense. And we heard stories from people who said, as soon as it gets to be a problem and my customer starts to complain, they're going to be back in the office. And most definitely, we saw a lot of business continuity happening initially as IT was adopting software programs, making sure everybody had the appropriate equipment, making sure that security was in place so that people can continue to work. And most definitely, we see a lot of measurement around that. They know whether or not, in fact, people have been able to maintain their business continuity. But further, and again, Jade also mentioned this, which is the executive talent strategies. And I think what's important to this is, essentially, hybrid is going to be table stakes. If you do not offer hybrid, essentially you risk losing that talent. But nevertheless, what's really interesting about all of these, it isn't just these 4 business factors, but they're trying to balance all of them all at the same time. And so the best stories were from people such as Baxter, who said, we were about to build a new building because we were completely out of space. But guess what? We're able to save on our capital investment now because not only does it allow us to attract and retain the best talent, but we also can maintain that business continuity. So we're moving forward with our hybrid model. Nevertheless, as I mentioned, there is no one model. However, what we would say is there is a dominant model, and that dominant model tends to be 3-2 or 2-3. And it is our belief that the reason they're landing on this 3-2-2-3, which is 3 days in the office, 2 days home, 2 days in the office, or 3 days, at home, regardless of whether or not they land on this, what I would say is fundamentally the reason that they're doing this is they're hedging their bets. By adopting this particular model, what happens is they're able to maintain their business continuity. What's interesting is you look at the 2 spectrums on this, right? It's really about decentralizing your processes. Either everything happens in the office, or everything is completely decentralized. Nobody's necessarily moving to that far extreme. Nevertheless, as we move forward, what we would say is these new hybrid models are introducing new challenges, despite the fact that they're testing this and quite frankly tailoring this with their executives that have been in the office, or excuse me, the employees that have been in the office, and the intention is to hybrid, to test this, and then move forward. What we would say is there are 6 emerging tensions, and I'm going to cover all of these. I'm a designer by training, and so I love tensions. And if you know designers, we love tensions because it's between those two spaces, right? Between those two polar opposites where the opportunity lies. So today I'm going to talk to you about 6 of these tensions, and hopefully I will illustrate before the end of the talk here that this is where the opportunity lies for all of us to come together and to consider what that future might be. So the first one is internal equity, and this is really around equality versus equity. Most definitely, employees understand that not everything is going to be equal. And in fact, as we start to look at organizations defining 1, 2, and 3 different kinds of profiles for their employees, what's happening, of course, is those that have to be in the office 100% of the time versus those that have to be remote 100% of the time, there's a disparity that's happening. But it's not just between those groups, it's actually between the hybrid groups. Because what's happening with regards to that 3-2-2-3 model is that actually it's a bit of a structured flexibility, and the decision making is landing on the leaders and it's being pushed down. So as a result of that, what tends to happen is one leader might make one decision about how they intend to implement the process, while another might make a different decision. That internal equity is causing tension amongst the teams, and it's likely to continue. The next area is collective knowledge. And I would say collective knowledge really has its basis in innovation, quite frankly. And you oftentimes will see that those that have adopted digital transformation are doing quite well when it comes to collective knowledge. I'm going to blow that one out a little bit later, so I'm going to come back to that. The next one is intentional gathering, and intentional gathering is exactly what it sounds like, right? There's a purpose and an intent. I generally refer to a metaphor of a vacation home versus a vacation. And if you have a vacation home, you know that when you go to your vacation home, you have all the time in the world, right? And so therefore, when you go to that vacation home, you might be doing laundry, you might be cleaning, you might be doing all kinds of things. But when you go on vacation, your time is limited, and you're very focused, and your agenda is very, very specific. And so when we talk about this future, what's going to happen is this intentional gathering is going to happen, which means people are going to be much more purposeful about why and when they come to the office. And as a result of that, they're going to look for a different kind of an expectation. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. The next one is visibility. And from an HR perspective, this is really about seen and not being seen. And most definitely, HR executives are very concerned about the growth and the development of their staff, okay? One thing that's most definite is when you're remote, quite frankly, you don't get the same kind of advancements as other people. I want to point this out because you just talked about ES and G, right? This one is smack dab in the middle of DEI and ESG. Because what tends to happen is the people who go home, the people who are doing the unfretted work, the unpaid labor of working with their children are often women. And so as we begin to consider an ecosystem which is completely distributed, and you've got individuals that are working from home, this notion of seen versus not being seen means there's a risk to their advancement. And that is of utmost concern. The next one is building bonds. This is very similar to intentional gathering, but unlike intentional gathering, which is really about coming together for a shared purpose, this one is more around building bonds. It's the tight ties, the loose ties. It's really about beginning to understand what your network is. And again, if we consider the fact that most people will not be having shared experiences, the question is, how are they going to know who in the organization to go to, even when the repository is there? So this is a question around how do you begin to support the building of bonds? Quite frankly, many people call this culture. And then lastly is whole person. And this is personally one of my very, very favorites, because I think as we look at the world, right, this is about creating whole people. This is asking organizations to be sustainable, to consider that their resource of people is renewable. And the way it's renewable is by giving that back to them. We can't be subtractive. We have to be regenerative. And what this is asking is that when you come to the office, how might you leave healthier than when you arrived? This is a completely different ballgame. And it's really around thinking about spaces that ground people, that make them feel whole, and that make them, again, perform at a high degree. I'm going to talk first about intentional gathering. This is the one that I mentioned earlier around the purpose and the reason for coming to work are going to be very, very important. And again, this really has its basis in what is the new ratio of the floor plan going to be? We have a framework that we use at Steelcase called I, we, owned, shared. And when you think about that framework, what has happened? The majority of organizations have adopted what is called a shared model. They've gone from 1-to-1 ratio to 1-to-many. And in some cases, it's moving from that shared model to neighborhoods, to campuses, to completely distributed across an ecosystem of home, third place, as well as work. And again, what this is going to suggest is that the workspace, as it grows in some of these more ancillary spaces or we shared spaces, this is the amping up of those interstitial spaces that connect the neighborhoods. If I'm an individual and I'm coming in with a very specific purpose, I'm going to have greater expectations about the way in which that space performs. I'm going to have greater expectations about what it delivers. We consider 4 work modes, which is focus, collaboration, social, and learning. And all of these have to be addressed. And while our quant research suggests that the reason people will come back to the office is for collaboration and for meetings and for social, we also know that focus time is equally important. And so as we consider space, it needs to be multimodal and it needs to address all of those patterns. Nevertheless, as we consider this individual coming into the office, we would also like to consider the fact that the N of 1 and the way in which we're measuring space so that we know that we can address the fluctuating needs throughout the organization are going to be paramount. So all of you that are addressing and are measuring and beginning to understand how that space is performing, that is going to become increasingly important. Visibility, as I mentioned earlier, was really around advancements. And in this regard, what we would say is it's really about equity, presence equity. How many of us have had an experience where we felt invisible? And oftentimes that has to do with presence inequity. You're the lone person that's on the phone call and your voice is not heard. This one really has its roots in hybrid collaboration and what that future of that's going to look like. Most definitely, as we consider things like visibility, it's making sure that that person has active participation. We're looking at the things like ease, equity, and engagement, meaning that that nomadic worker that's in the office needs to connect quickly to their virtual participant. It's looking at the difference between one person who you see from head up and the other person you see full body. That inequity is not going to work. It's understanding eye to eye and eye to information and the ways in which you will have dyadic interactions with somebody who is not present. It's integrating technology in a thoughtful way that allows individuals to be seen, to be heard, and to have a presence. We're looking for not just presence equity, but presence fluidity, the ability to move between both of those worlds. And then lastly, collective knowledge really has its basis in information architecture or the way in which information flows through the organization. This is quite interesting because, as you know, when it comes to innovation, it starts with an idea. It's oftentimes a spark of an idea. And people will say, well, I really want to come to the office because I want to bump into X, Y, and Z. And in fact, we heard in the consultant world where the consultants, if you know anything about them, oftentimes are out in the field, and when they come back, they may have one day in the office. And they said, I deliberately park myself right here because I know when that partner comes out of the office, they're going to talk to me. But collective knowledge isn't just about the robust data system that is going to be necessary moving forward. It's also being able to identify the right person to talk to at the right time. And so yesterday we saw a video fly through where the people came into the environment, and immediately when they came in, they knew who was where. Okay, so connecting to people and information is going to be equally valuable. And really it's going to be about the ways in which we take that collective knowledge and make it visible. It's also things like digital exhaust. It's understanding and or using space to connect people. So as you're walking through the environment, you begin to have a sense of who is on the other side of that project room, of what it is they're working on, of what is going on in the organization, and it's really bringing awareness to everything that is happening simultaneously. So with that, I just want to leave you with parting thought here around the fact that we are all in this together. I would say that this conference is really about popping up above that canopy line, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk with all of you today. But I hope all of you, in listening to me, understand that there is a role that space can play in developing a better future for us. And I fundamentally believe that once we see that clearing in the horizon, what we have learned as we have foraged through the forest over the last 18 to 20 months will make us better, will make us stronger, so that we can develop environments that not are only agile, but actually support people in a compelling way to make the experience that much better. Thank you so much for your time.